Coming up next is Patrick Johnson, Assistant Professor of Communication here at IUN Northwest in the School of the Arts, and he will be speaking to us on rewriting religion, how LGBTQ individuals are finding a place of belonging online. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So when we think about LGBTQ individuals and religion, the first images that probably come into our head are something similar to this. Right, they are two sides, diametrically opposed, can never agree, fundamentally opposed to each other's existence. So on the left, we have the Westboro. Your right, my left, we have the Westboro Baptist Church protesting. And on the other one, we have a protest against religion, saying there's no hate like Christian love. We can see the pride flag there. Back in 2008, I was living in Los Angeles, California, when Proposition 8 passed, which was the proposition that basically delegalized same-sex marriage. When it was passed, numerous articles were written blaming religion specifically for this being passed. This is something that we see today, right? We have religious freedom bills getting protested, we have Supreme Court cases over cakes, and we have Don't Say Gay bills. And religion and LGBTQ identity are pitted against each other. Now, I study social media, and I specifically study the way that marginalized groups, particularly the LGBTQ community, use social media to find places of belonging. And one of the things that I've noticed through all of my many friends that I have and people that I've seen is that they're not always diametrically opposed. And I started becoming really interested at how people are not necessarily abandoning religion once they come to terms with their LGBTQ identity, or vice versa. And so I became interested in how people were using social media to move from images like this to this. Essentially, how are people blending their religious identities with their sexual orientations? Now, yes, there are tons of churches that exist, particularly within various sects of Protestantism, Judaism, that are very accepting and opening of LGBTQ individuals. But this is not what I was interested in. I was interested in the people who maintain a very strong Catholic identity with their LGBTQ identity, or a very strong Muslim identity with their LGBTQ identity. So to look at this, I turned to social media, and I worked with a group of people, some of the top religion and media scholars in the country, applying a theoretical lens that we call the third spaces of digital religion. So the third spaces of digital religion, we drew a lot from Homi Bhabha and their work on the location of culture, particularly talking about third places. Right, so according to Bhabha, third places are places that exist in the beyond and work as spaces of intervention. So specifically, Bhabha was talking about colonialism and the way that oppressed nations and colonized nations were able to blend forms of culture from both the colonizer as well as the indigenous cultures to form new blendings of the culture, particularly in first generation or second generation people who didn't know life before colonialism. Right? And so we started thinking, well, how can digital spaces function like this? So I'm going to talk about a little bit of a case study that I worked on for this new book that is now on sale called The Third Spaces of Digital Religion, where I looked specifically at digital spaces where LGBTQ individuals were doing just this. Now, third spaces are nothing unique to social media, obviously, and they are not new for LGBTQ individuals either. In fact, the LGBTQ community has a long history of creating third spaces. Back in the 1940s, 1950s, right, we had the rise of gay bars and bathhouses and book clubs and all these places that existed outside of society in order to blend their personalities, their identities with the outside world, right? And in fact, they were so prominent within the LGBTQ community that this is how the LGBTQ rights movement even launched in the first place, right? It launched out of the gay bars, it launched out of the bathhouses. So I was interested in seeing how that happened. So I started looking at different social media blogs and Facebook posts, and some of the ones that I looked at, they served three different purposes, essentially. So the first one were ones that were all about forming a community. So two that I looked at specifically was a blog for LGBTQ Muslim individuals called I Am Not Haram, as well as a blog written by a gay Catholic priest called Farsi, which had a Facebook page associated with it called Gay Traditionalist Catholic. And what these served as were places that people, like-minded individuals, could come together almost as if a Bible study was happening, or if you had a group that would get together and read and discuss the Quran. So during these many blog posts, people were getting together and discussing the literature. They were discussing the Bible and finding new interpretations. When the Pope would say something, right, there would be a new spin and interpretation that was happening. They not only were giving information, but they specifically were to help build a community where people could contextualize it together. Almost as if you were going to a church service, right? Just digitally. The second type of way that it occurred was less about forming community and more about spreading the word outwards, right? So these happened more on blogs that had less community engagement. And one of the big ones that I looked at was a blog written by a priest, and I wrote down the names because I couldn't remember them, called Hear Our Voices, which was specifically written for non-LGBTQ individuals to try to change the way that they saw traditional Catholic scripture. So one of the ways that they were doing it was by combining these third spaces, which are blending and changing locations and forms of culture, with also changing individual identities, right? And so I drew largely from the work of Jose Munoz and his work on disidentifications, right? Which is almost the same concept as the third space, but an internal one, right? This is how we blend our own personal identities with others. But there was a third type that I became really interested in, right? So we had creating places of belonging, we had trying to educate others. But I also was interested on what happens when we just mix it up with everyone and we have that conversation. And so I went to everybody's favorite place for safe conversations, Reddit. Because nothing bad ever happens on Reddit. So there were numerous discussions that were happening in all sorts of different threads. But the interesting part was that the threads about gay Muslim individuals and gay Catholic individuals were almost exclusively on the religion subreddits, not on the LGBTQ subreddits. Where in fact the support and encouragement came from the religious ones. And there were times when they would spill over into kind of ex-religious ones. And that is not where the support came from. In fact, there was one case study that I talked about which led to kind of a direct confrontation when one person found him being discussed about on another one as being a bad gay for still being a Muslim. So these are just a few examples, I know I'm almost out of time, of the different ways that LGBTQ individuals, but more any marginalized community, are using social media in order to blend various elements of their culture and their beliefs with others. Thank you.